Welcome into another episode of Everything is Logistics, a podcast for the thinkers in freight. We are proudly presented by SPI Logistics, and I am your host, Blythe Milligan. And today we're doing the part of logistics tech that nobody puts on a booth banner: implementation. The messy middle where budgets get weird, timelines slip, and everyone suddenly discovers how much tribal knowledge is trapped in one dispatcher's head. My guest today is Nate Johnson. He is the CEO of GLCS. Nate's lived the industry from multiple angles, and now he spends his time helping teams pick the right tools, integrate them without lighting money on fire, and actually get value after go live. We're going to be talking about why rollouts fail, how to budget beyond the subscription fee, what to demand in onboarding and support, what data and integrations really require, and where AI fits into all of it. So, Nate, I've been wanting to have this conversation with you for a long time about where logistics tech implementation goes right and where it goes wrong. So, welcome to the show, especially on such a short notice, where I asked you yesterday and you said yes to today.
Sure. Today worked. So that's not always the case. I've been out traveling. I got home late last night, and this just fit. So it was perfect. It was meant to be, Blythe, and I appreciate you having me on the show.
Absolutely. And I'm happy to have this conversation too, right before one of the biggest, maybe the biggest industry event for logistics. And that is Manifest. There's going to be a lot of tech players there, and it's going to be a lot to sort of decipher through. But first question right off the jump: where does logistics tech implementation go right and where does it go wrong?
So I'm going to answer something that you said before. Nobody puts implementation on their booth except for us. It is on our booth. When you look at our booth and our banners, we list that we assist in implementation. And we've done hundreds and hundreds, if not closer to 1,000 projects related to implementation. So where we see things go wrong is there's many areas where they can go wrong. But the ultimate issue is, are you buying the right solution that you need? And do you even need it? So we've seen freight tech go wild over the last 10 or 15 years. And even now today, there are so many vendors that are dealing with one prescriptive use case. And so you end up, running down that road, you as a carrier or broker, run down that road, find the solution, think it's going to work, and then find out, hey, this doesn't do exactly what we wanted it to do. So first and foremost, why are you buying this? Documenting what sort of processes you have that are going to be impacted with that, and understanding that when you go to market to try to find a vendor, that vendor is reviewing your very detailed requirements document that says, this is what we do today, and this is what we're looking to replace. And these are our requirements that we have to move forward. Anyone can do that themselves. The more robust of a solution you're looking at, it becomes much more complicated. If you're looking at replacing your TMS, you have a lot of requirements associated with that. If you're looking to do automated order entry using an AI solution, that's a component of a TMS, or not a component of a TMS, but a bolt-on to a TMS. So it's much smaller requirements. So our approach with all of our customers is, when they ask us to help in a vendor selection, that's pre-implementation, is, why do you want this? And prove to us that you need this solution. And that can be a short conversation or a long conversation, but we are going to take the position that you don't need it, and then decide that you do. And it doesn't mean that you don't need it. It just means that we want to go through the process of proving out that this is going to have value for your organization. So I'd say that's the first place that we start on an implementation, where we see things lots of times go wrong because you don't have your requirements set. How is the vendor supposed to know that their solution is actually going to work for you?
And so is it more like just reading a document from the vendor, or if you're kind of playing like matchmaker in that sense for your clients versus the solution that you're recommending?
So on our side, once we have that requirements set, we've built a whole requirements document, more of an RFP. and it's in depth. It really depends upon the engagement, and this gets very, very complicated in a multi-month, if not a year-long engagement. And the larger discussions for a larger enterprise organization could take quite a while. But a smaller organization, we might have that done in a matter of a few hours. And so it really depends on what you're looking for. And then once we have that document, we're partnered with pretty much every freight tech organization out there, or we have a relationship, especially if they're established. We have a relationship with them in some way, shape, or form. So we have people in our organization that are just studying freight tech, and that's pretty much all they do is interact with freight technology, ensure that we stay up on top of that, because over our 400 customers, they all have different needs. So we're always looking to see what new thing that they might be interested in, et cetera, et cetera. So on our side, we have a unique point of view. But if you're coming at it from a carrier or a broker, and you only have your view of what time you've invested into it, you gather that, you take it to the vendor. The vendor then has to come back and prove that they can check all the boxes on that requirements document. Or the RFP, whatever you want to define it as. But if they check all the boxes, or if they check 90% of the boxes, then they're potentially a viable solution. You go through, this is a complicated scenario. If you're asking for AI automation in some area of your business, there's probably 10, 15, 20 vendors that you might have to walk through to go see that. If you're not to go review their solutions, unless you have a previous relationship with them and you already kind of know which vendors you want to work with. So that vendor then would come forward and check those boxes, say, yes, we can do this, and hopefully be able to do an actual demo, which is something that we typically require from vendors. Is you have to show us that your solution will actually work, not a PowerPoint presentation.
Oh, that's interesting. So you kind of put like the feet to the fire for your clients. And so during that demo, what are you looking for? Are there like green flags or red flags that you're looking for to make that decision?
Yeah, all kinds. So first and foremost, can it do what we need it to do? Second, we're actually looking beyond that at how well put together the organization is. Is this an actual demo? Is this somebody who's grabbing at things to make it happen? So that's going to tell us a little bit about the organization that we're working with, or the vendor that we're prospecting. So we're going to look at that, ensure that the demo is seamless and right, and that it's not something that the company has experience. I think is the best way of stating that. So ultimately, we're going to look at that. Then we're going to aggregate costs and see all the costs across the vendors as well. Help the client make their determination based on that and potential return on investment, which typically return on investment, we're going to look at their numbers. So we're not going to make up numbers for them. We're going to sit down and actually apply their numbers. Once again, there's different levels of this type of an engagement, but if it's anything moderate, we're absolutely going to put some sort of cost model together that we'll be able to take against the cost of the new solution, and then develop some sort of ROI.
So I remember when I worked in-house at a brokerage, and I think a couple years in, we switched TMS providers, and it was a shit show to say the least. And it was just one of those things where we had a previous TMS that was deeply integrated into our accounting system, and the IT leadership internally made the decision to switch TMS providers without really engaging any of the staff, without engaging the accounting department. And after we had already made this investment, it wasn't fully realized what the mistake was until later on. Do you see that a lot? Is that common for the internal decision makers, just to go ahead and just buy software without engaging the employees that are actually going to use it?
We're aware of that. Our clients don't do that because they're engaging us so they don't have to. Making a mistake on a large piece of technology can be catastrophic in a variety of ways to your business. It can cause a significant amount of damage internally through personnel and all the pain that happens. you know, not being able to settle orders, not being able to have the integrations that you once had, or having to wait a year or two to get those done, can be very, very frustrating and taxing for your existing employees. Now, a trucking company has a issue with that even more so because they are working with a substantial number of drivers. And so if it's something that bleeds into drivers and causes trucks to sit, or drivers to be frustrated, now you have retention, turnover issues, and you have costs that are accumulated in delayed trucks. So we want to make sure that any sort of major investment is done right. But we hear all the time about companies that that select a piece of technology, implement it, and it fails, or it doesn't get them to where they want it to go. That being said, this is a complex industry. Even with a fully robust requirements document, you're going to be in the middle of an implementation, and somebody's going to say, "Oh yeah, we forgot about this." So once you go live, you're still going to have problems with that. And those requirements that we gather early on actually turn into testing scripts. So we will take each requirement and turn it into testing, and then eventually turn that into training documentation. So that's very important that those requirements are correct early on. Obviously, you don't want to buy a new piece of tech to just replace your old tech. So those requirements will also include, they'll include, this is what we do today, and this is what we want to do tomorrow, and the reason why we're moving to a new technology platform. So it's absolutely, plenty of failures are happening. The smaller of the tech organizations, I'd say there's probably more failures. We're actually getting scenarios where clients are wanting to buy 2, 3, 4 solutions that all do the same thing, test them all out, and run with one. That I've never seen before. So, but they're smaller solutions. So,
and I am curious, sort of like I guess the overall landscape. Obviously, freight tech has exploded in adoption rates over the last decade, especially
right.
Over the last 5-6 years. And I'm curious, how are the legacy players versus the newer players? Do you find that they're starting to talk to each other more software wise, or are they still kind of siloed off?
So the legacy players, and that's not a derogative term by any means, some of the legacy players are doing quite well, and they have an image issue. So they need to get away from being considered legacy. Microsoft is one of the oldest tech companies out there, and nobody thinks of them as legacy. So, the challenge there is, if you are defined as a legacy organization, we work with every one of them, is how do you create a scenario where you're not legacy, where you are innovative? And many of them are very innovative and have very interesting things, and are cutting edge, actually, in many cases, but they are having to fight through that legacy problem. So to the point of freight tech's advanced so much over the last 15 years, 10 to 15 years. I go back to 2010, 2011, on being employed on the freight tech side. Prior to that, I ran fleets, but we see, I look back just a few years further than that, and just go, how many trucking companies actually had EL or mobile com, to use that term, back in 2005? And I would say 25%. So 20 years ago, maybe 20 or maybe 75% of our companies out there today were operating without satellite tracking.
Probably without a cell phone too.
Yeah, well, maybe the driver had a cell phone, maybe they weren't, maybe they didn't. But I would say the vast majority of the drivers had cell phones, but they weren't smartphones. You didn't have apps that you could track your driver on. So, in 20 years, we've gone from, even when I go back 10 years previous to that, when I was entering the industry, everything I did was on paper. There were systems. We had Westinghouse as our solution back there, which eventually ended up becoming Innovative, or acquiring through that. Anyway, the data points that we would track in the mid 90s were 30. maybe 30 total data points. And today you have potentially hundreds that are being tracked daily, if not thousands that are being tracked daily as an asset-based carrier. So, this has all evolved really since 2005, 2006, but it certainly took off much faster in the last 10 years. I think a lot of that stems from the ELD mandates. So now all of a sudden we are tracking every truck, and we now have ECM data rolling out of every truck, and you can now manage every data point that ECM is producing if you want to, which includes driver behavior, fuel, etc. So that's launched into, that immediately created the visibility market, the way that we know it today. Your Project 44, your FourKites, those, they actually existed before, but it strengthened them because now every Class 8 truck is now being tracked. So that's truly where, if you go back and kind of look at the inflection point of when we started to launch, it matches up with the ELD mandate.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, like that maybe that was the first domino to fall, and then now that has led to, the modern freight ecosystem that or freight tech ecosystem that we find ourselves in. And I just as you were talking, I mean, going from 30 data points to hundreds, how are you helping teams, especially during the implementation process, understand that they're going to have so much more data to deal with? How do they not have data overload? How do they make sure that their data is clean, is usable? What are maybe some of those steps that you discover during implementation, or maybe even before you even start implementation?
Well, it's just, I mean, whether it's before, after, or during, or mostly it's after, but carriers, brokers are swimming in data. We don't even know what to do with it all. You have behavior data that we're starting to come forward on. You have all kinds of data points that are frankly just sitting there. In many cases, they're not being used at all. We don't know how to use them. We used to say trucking isn't rocket science. Well, guess who's being employed in trucking now? Rocket scientists. So because we have so much data and we want so many complicated things to save a penny a mile, we've now had to reach out to people that work for NASA to help us out. And that's cool. That's great. That's wonderful. But it wasn't that long ago that trucking wasn't rocket science, and it was just moving a load. We, in a lot of ways, through various administrations, have caused compliance requirements that have created technology and whatnot. So how do you manage all of this, and how do you keep it clean? Well, processes define everything, right? So if you do not have a solid process to run your organization from order to cash, then your data is, and you're not enforcing that process, then your data is going to start to slip. You're going to have some messy data. Going back to those requirements, which become test scripts, which become training documentations. Training is everything. Lots of times people will adopt a solution, implement it, and never touch it again as far as a training standpoint, never create that documentation, never touch it again. You degrade on your, what we call tribal knowledge, on every user that's touching that software that leaves the company. So, Billy had it originally, then Lisa was the primary user after that, and Lisa was only 80% of Billy because she didn't get direct training. So refreshing that training, keeping them engaged, ensuring that you're working with the vendors to meet that requirement of keeping them up to speed, I think is extremely important. As far as keeping data cleanly beyond that, because sometimes this is a lot of data, right? If you think, in some cases, you could get a data feed from a truck and get, let's say you have 1,000 trucks, and every 5 seconds you're getting a breadcrumb trail with ECM data. Do you want that? Does it make a need for you? If you suddenly have a need for that, what are you going to do with it all? And then you actually contain quite a bit of data generally that you're storing. So it continues to become larger and larger. So AI is certainly a component of keeping data clean. I think as we move on further, we'll see that fixing some of these scenarios where if you have unclean data, AI, that was one of the first use cases we wanted to use it for, was keeping data clean or identifying that's a problem. But ultimately, you're reflecting that AI bot or automation around a specific process that you've developed. So you're just replacing that process with an automation.
And so with your processes, because I'm big on, and I don't know if I'm doing this right, or I say I'm big on, documenting your processes, but I frankly don't. I know that there's ways that I could improve the documentation of it and following through. What are maybe some just high level tips for folks who are like, I know that this is something I should be doing, but what's maybe a quick way to start documenting my processes in a way that won't, drive me crazy?
So there's a few products that will record your screen, right? But videos, we like videos. And unfortunately with a video, if you change your process, you have to redo your video. But doing a 2 or 3 minute clip is really not that big of a deal. So when you build out and you create these requirements, which become test scripts, which become training documentation, adding a video onto that today is really not that big of a deal. And there's lots of products, Script, I think, is one that we see kind of the most because it's attached to Google. And there's a freemium version on Google. So you can use it within Google Chrome at basically no cost. It's not as efficient as if you pay for it, but it'll do screen captures every time you click on something. And then it'll create a area where you can go in and expand upon those screen captures. It's not the best documentation of it. And it's certainly not the way we would do training documentations, 15 years ago. But you don't necessarily need it to be extremely pretty. And what you do need it to not be. So what you want to avoid is a training documentation that is so large that it can't possibly be consumed, or a video that's so long that no one's going to watch it. So there's those pieces of it too. Also, the AI side on training is emerging more and more every day. So we're kind of excited. It's one of the areas of AI I'm excited for. How to apply that into software training. I don't think anyone's really capitalized on that to a level, but you look at some products that are out there that are more human training. It's like sales training and customer interaction, that kind of stuff. It's not going to be too long until those type of products are going to start moving into here's how we train our software.
So it almost sounds like it could be as simple as, starting a Google Doc and taking screenshots of every click you make and maybe the why behind those clicks, or the video of just a quick overview, but don't make it too long to where the other people will avoid it.
Right. You want the users to actually go find it, and then putting the metadata behind it about what you're actually doing so they can search it, creating a medium for that. You can't necessarily drop it all on YouTube because you're putting in secret sauce to your organization. So it's got to be private, or should be private. This all, though, typically stems from that initial requirement document that we go back to. So that's why I started out with that, because your requirements define your process. Your process defines your testing, and then ultimately your testing and your processes define your training. So, and your training material. So yeah, you might start out with a Visio, process flow, whatever. It doesn't matter. You put it, as long as it's digital, you can advance it. If it's in Excel, whatever, it really doesn't matter if you're doing nothing today. The fact is, tomorrow you need to do something, and it needs to be able to be understood by more than just the person that created it.
Yeah, because if you do all of those steps properly, because my next question was going to be around how do you avoid some of the hidden costs and hidden fees? But it sounds like if you do those first few steps properly, then you avoid some of those hidden fees, or maybe scope creep and things like that that you wouldn't have anticipated, maybe not have budgeted for, and then before you know it, the project has ballooned and you're way over budget than what you anticipated.
Or you can predict where you may go, And, I tell every customer of ours, do not buy a solution based upon a technology roadmap or a development roadmap. So we're going to have this feature out in 6 months, a year, whatever the case may be. And I cannot say how many times we've had customers not heed that advice and then end up having cost overruns because that feature was now stricken, or it's not going to be out for another year, but it's a go live requirement. It's something that customer needs to be able to use the product to move forward. So you are putting yourself at risk when you go. You should buy the solution that meets 90% of your requirements or more. 80% is debatable. If you have no other solution above and beyond that, 80% is debatable, and then build something on the side to meet the remaining 10 to 20%. But you absolutely should not buy something that is go live requirement without knowing that that's in a sales or in a development roadmap of some kind. And if you do, it's because everyone ends up doing it anyway. You need to lock in your contract around that. Can't overrun. That has to be a defined date, and potentially release you of your contract if that doesn't get, if that development item does not get released at the right time. Usually there's a lot more than one. Usually when you get into this, there's going to be dozens potentially when you start looking at that. So you should not have many cost overruns if your vendor is 100% honest and they didn't create a scenario where they're showing vaporware, which still happens when you get away from the PowerPoints. It's still, you still end up in a scenario where, yes, we can do that. Yes, we can do that. They don't fully understand the requirement and they didn't ask enough questions. That can still happen. It's limited. But the biggest issue is buying something that doesn't exist.
And yeah, I would think the vendor selection part is probably the most difficult, because it sounds like not your firm, but maybe other firms, or maybe companies just aren't engaging a firm to help them through this process, and they see the bells and whistles of all of the new technology that's entered the market, and they think it's a great idea, and then they just spend money on it instead of doing their due diligence. I am curious, when maybe some of your clients have seen some of these, or maybe just leads you've talked to or people you've talked to in general, if they see the new shiny toy, how do you figure out, or how do you sort of work through them or work with them to figure out if that solution is actually right for their tech stack?
Right. So, I'm going to talk about a couple of things, because you brought up, you sort of open the door to something, which is, they see the new shiny thing, and some people don't wait. They just go out and they do a demo and they purchase it. In some cases, it's not even a demo. It's just a discussion or a PowerPoint slide deck of, hey, we can do all of this. And you look at an automation, for example, how do you demo an automation when it doesn't exist in your system yet? So those organizations need to figure that component out, because it ends up failing, where the adoption rate can be difficult because they're not getting to the specific need of the customer. But yeah, you do see a lot of them run out and buy stuff, and it doesn't work out right. And we do hear that, and we do see vendors exiting the market, or just simply not being around anymore, especially on the startup side. They're not very noisy. Somebody catches on that they're around, but we've had a number of vendors that have entered the market, and then they are no longer in the market anymore at all. So they find out that they just can't manage this. So trucking, brokerage, logistics in general is something that never forgets. So you have to be extremely clean on those first few moves, or be very honest on the fact that you are, as a vendor, are trying to deploy something that you really don't have widely deployed. So, and that should be reflective in the cost. So I don't know if I entirely answered your question there, but I think I maybe jumped in before it. So
no, I think it's just trying to set sort of the baseline level of when companies decide to engage with a new technology or new technology partner, and if that's actually going to make sense for the company's investment, not just money wise, but time wise too. Because I imagine that some, to hint at what you were just speaking to, you invest a lot of time and energy and money into onboarding a new tool, only to find out that they've exited the market because they were technically a startup. That's got to be incredibly frustrating and maybe crippling to some businesses out there.
Yeah, depending upon the size of the solution, it could be crippling. It could be just, it can also have a customer impact. A lot of these tools are customer facing or are assisting with, reduction in people that are customer facing, which we debate with a little bit, that you shouldn't necessarily reduce in count, but double down your effort towards customer facing. But without going down that road, plenty of them see things. Social media is a tough one. There's lots of people that'll come out there. They'll do podcasts. They'll broadcast their tool, whatever the case may be. It looks nice, shiny, all great. There's VC investment, so they have some capital. They can build a big booth. They can show up. They can do some interesting things, it appears that they can do some interesting things. And they do have an ICP that probably fits them most of the time, or they did have a customer base that they started out with. So I think it's important that you ask the right questions up front, which could be, how many customers do you actually have in production, not in testing? In production, what is your roadmap? What are you working on? How many employees do you have? I think is another, sometimes you'll find out there's 2 employees. So even though there's very noisy social media behind it, there's 2 employees and maybe there's 15 developers in XYZ location across the world or more. But there's really only 2 people that are championing the product. And those are all, they're not bad things. By all means, they're not bad things, but you need to be aware of the risks that you're taking by walking down the road. In addition, all the AI and automation solutions that are out there, at our enterprise and larger mid-market customers, they don't want they're frustrated at this point. There's too many solutions in market. They're only addressing 1 to 3 use cases. Lots of them are in competition with one another, or if you look at roadmap, they're planning on competing with one another. And vendor management is huge, especially right now where the footprint of this looks like you may have 20 or 30 bot solutions out there. So there's a few companies that are trying to, deploy many of them instead of just 1 or 2 or 3. So the usual freight tech side is get some capital, get an idea, get to the point where you're going to create a solution, get some capital to support that, do one thing really, really well, and then sell it, and then figure out how to add on a few more. And there's nothing wrong with that, but these are small solutions that are extremely efficient. But if I'm a CIO of a company, I don't want 30 vendors as I don't want to have to manage 30 vendors to run my automations.
Yeah. I mean, especially with and I definitely want to dive more into the AI agent side of things, because I think that there's still a lot of questions around, sort of the success rate. But I am curious, as a side note, there's a lot of tribal knowledge when it comes to logistics and fleet operations and brokerage all of those different silos within logistics. With a lot of these, sort of VC-backed firms, technology providers that have entered the space within the last handful of years, do you think that concept still exists, that, oh, they're an outsider, they don't know our industry, so that solution can't be good? Or is the tide kind of shifting a little bit where, we are, as an industry, starting to get more attention from outsiders, from venture capital firms and things like that, where they are looking at some of the glaring problems? Is it good to have that outsider perspective, or do you still need to pair the tribal knowledge with the solutions that are being presented on the market?
Yeah, I look at it from both sides, right? You are going to have someone championing idea that's coming from market or potentially from outside the market. But if they're coming from outside of the market, then that's why you ask that question around who's your staff, who's working with you, and what's their tenure, because we're a complicated industry, more complicated than any outsider thinks that we are. And I've had plenty of those conversations with outsiders, and when they're going to be problematic versus when they're not. And some of the more successful solutions are folks that are coming from outside of the industry that surround themselves with industry experts. In the beginning, it may be an advisory capacity, but eventually, you're bringing them on staff to help drive product. And you may have a whole bunch of really, really smart people building it that are not from industry, but you have architected out this solution using people that understand the day-to-day needs of whatever ICP you have.
And so, as we've talked about, what a company should do beforehand, and then maybe some of the questions that they should be, paying attention to, or some of the demo information that they should be paying attention to, and a little bit around implementation. But after you get the software implemented, what happens afterwards? What should companies, as from a support perspective, what should companies be aware of? What are some red flags, green flags on the support side of things after the product is implemented?
Yeah, so this also varies based upon the size of the solution that you're purchasing. So let's go down the road of a SaaS TMS. You would have already defined who owns the data, but those are the more complicated sides. And how do I access the data? How do I go from you're never coming out of an implementation at 100% utilization of a software, or you're probably never going to achieve 100% utilization of a software anyway. But if you can get to 80%, lots of times you're doing really well, and you're probably one of the stronger organizations of that particular vendor. So I think what's continued training I already talked about. That's first and foremost. Vendor relations, continuing to manage that vendor, work with that vendor, quarterly, biannual, whatever updates with that vendor. If they're a major component, so like a TMS, if they are a major component of your company, and companies, brokerages, trucking companies, whatever, if you have a TMS, your entire business circles around that. If it shuts off, tell me what happens. If it's just gone tomorrow and it won't turn back on, tell me what happens. You're having problems. And so maintaining that vendor relation, be involved with that vendor. Go to their conferences. Even if you just send one or two people, I usually recommend, the larger the organization that you have, the more often you want to send two people because of redundancy scenarios. But this business is all about relationships as well, and that does not just include customers. That includes your vendors. So the continued training and continued relationship, understanding what they're going to do. We are moving fast. Freight tech is moving fast. What is here last year is not what's here this year. They've made a significant advancement. Dependent upon who they are, their product might even not look the same as what it was, and you might not know that if you don't have that continued relationship. That is a two-way street. It's not always on the vendor. It is on the customer as well to show the effort that they want to maintain that. Creating your super users. So the users that know the products, regardless of size, those that understand that if you can't create a super user, or you don't want to create a super user, give us a call. We're already that. So we support everyone on a monthly basis that way, or can support you on a monthly basis that way. So you want to make sure that if you have a list of 50 different tech vendors that you're working with, or 20, or whatever the number is, who owns that vendor relationship, and how often are they interacting with them?
And I imagine there's probably some opportunities for consolidation if you're looking at the relationships of all of the vendors that you're working with, And some of those vendors might add some features in the future, or maybe remove some features that you really liked. I would imagine that that's maybe like a yearly pruning process to see, depending on your contract, of course, to see which of these vendors can you maybe not work with anymore, versus vendors that maybe you want to invest a little bit more in because they're developing those capabilities that you need for the future.
Yeah, or the selection of a new vendor to replace multiple existing vendors. So that can happen too. And contract management is important. You brought up the contract. So when you're signing a subscription or SaaS agreement, there's usually a period of time that's going to run. It's going to be a year to 5 years, something like that. You shouldn't decide that you're going to look at the renewal of that 6 months before. You should be looking at it, depending upon the size of your organization, potentially 2 years before, 18 months before, 12 months before. It depends upon the complexity of the solution. But the last thing you want to do is 6 months prior start looking for a way that's faster, better, cheaper, stronger, and not have the time to get it done when that contract renews. Sometimes you can go month to month, sometimes you can't. So you can have that conversation, but certainly, our target is by all means, and we track most of our customers' contracts, so we're reminding them, hey, this is coming up. But if this is something, we typically know what they don't want and what they do want, and so if it's a TMS coming up, you have a year left on the contract, we'll definitely bring it up to them. But you can do that on your own quite easily. So that's important. Many of these contracts just auto renew. That's probably less than what it used to be. It used to be across the board, but many of them will auto renew. So I think you need to get a reminder these days about that, but it's a reminder. It's not if you let it go, in many cases, it's going to auto renew potentially for 3 to 5 years, and then you're locked in. So, there's nothing wrong with keeping the existing vendor, but to your point, not only do you have that happening, you have acquisitions happening with other areas, and then you have the TMSs, which historically with the TMS, when Freight Tech goes wild, the TMS is going to start, and there's a subject matter that makes sense for them. They're going to start looking to build that in their base solution or as an offering in addition to their solution. And that's going to create pain for those individual solutions that were out there that bolted on to the TMS. So, but that is historically, going back my entire career, that's historically what we've seen happen with TMSs.
So, with all of your experience in this industry, I'm curious as to, you mentioned 2 years that you should be looking out on some of these contracts. With the speed of how Freight Tech is evolving, I'm curious as to what is the longest, as I guess, what type of software takes the longest to implement, and then what is surprisingly easier to implement and takes a shorter amount of time.
Sure. Well, one thing to add on there too is the term future proof. I don't believe in that term at all. We have no idea what's going to happen in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. We can guess. Maybe 2 years we know. 5 years, we have no idea. We have no clue. Who would have thought that LLMs and AI would have had the impact that it did? We all maybe kind of thought that it would, but we're still figuring out how to even deploy it. And so what is this going to look like in 5 years? No one knows. What's your hardware requirements? Who would have thought that RAM, random access memory on machines would have went nuts in cost, so you can't even get it anymore? It's almost championed the whole idea of moving off premise on any sort of hosted solution into a cloud, because it allows it to be much more managed and at cheaper cost. So we could not have predicted that 5 years ago. Anyone who did, I think you can predict components of it, but anyone that did is wrong, or isn't wrong. But anyone who did, I guess I don't know. I don't know them. No one came up and said, "Hey,
They're retired on a beach somewhere."
Right, exactly. So the more complex ones, I'm just going to put it simple as this: the more expensive it is, the harder it is to implement. It's very simple when it comes to that. Your freight network optimization tools, those are pretty heavy, or can be. The moment someone says, hey, I have a product that should take 6 months or 12 months to implement, and says, hey, we'll do this in 2 to 4 weeks, you should be asking a lot more questions than just accepting that. So it is possible that we've seen some products start to implement extremely fast. A lot of that is driven on the fact that they're pushing more onto the customer than what they've ever pushed before. They're not aware of it. So, but your TMS is one of the heaviest. Obviously, you have some document workflow, EDI, or customer visibility is, well, sometimes customer visibility is not, but to use the term EDI and encompass all API and customer interaction with it, I think that can be heavy because there's many mid-sized customers may have 100 trading partners, and you have to work through all of that. So that can be a long pull in an implementation that you're not expecting. And those are the primary ones. Easy ones, we've seen some email automation, back office billing automation, order or freight out at pay. Those things we see substantial impact in an organization very, very quickly. In some cases, you're up and running in 30, 60, 90 days or less. If you have an accounting department of 60 people, there's 30 people you need to figure out what to do with. Maybe 20 on the low end, but it is that much of a substantial deployment, and it's not that hard to implement, assuming that the product is already integrated, already has their requirements all figured out, and they're a bolt-on. Now, typically those have one use case to them. So this is an example of, you're going to have one vendor, but the impact of this to your organization is so big that it's okay to have that one vendor right now. Somewhere down the road, the ecosystem will probably look a little different, but there's a few that are out there that encompass freight audit pay and many other solutions, but there's a lot that are targeting freight audit pay that have one solution or three or less.
Is there still a big, I would imagine that this debate is still existing, but the build versus buy debate, how is that happening internally? And then related, what does, I guess, sort of a modern freight IT department look like?
Two different ways, either very robust or very lean. It's very rare you see one kind of in the middle. And if they are in the middle, they're looking to go one way or the other. And they're scoping that out.
What's very robust?
Very robust meaning many people. There's no ratio that necessarily hits that, but we have customers that have 150 people in their IT department.
Wow.
Or more in some cases, and then and they're not in the top 25, so they might be in the top 100. And then we have 1,000 truck fleets that have one or two people in IT. So they outsource a lot of things. So but in the middle, you typically will have, we're going to handle all the processes that we need an FTE for. And then we're going to outsource everything that's fractional. So for example, if you don't need a full-time DBA, hiring a full-time DBA and then asking that full-time DBA to do vendor management.
DBA meaning
database administrator. Yeah. So asking them to manage vendor relationships or something else is not an effective use of their time typically, and they may not be the best person at that. So you want to make sure that you can do that. Or there's fractional organizations out there. We do that across all of the IT ecosystem for a trucking company, a brokerage, a shipper. We can handle kind of any component of that, but you can outsource it to anyone else too. There's plenty of managed service providers out there that have those type of roles. So we've seen that. So that's kind of the middle ground on what it looks like. And then the build or buy discussion, I think we see buy or build more often on the non-asset side. And that's because it's easier to build a non-asset TMS than an asset TMS, and it's easier by a long shot. Doesn't mean that the non-asset TMSs out there aren't amazing, but it is anyone that's done it before knows exactly what I'm talking about. You have all the contiguous problems with the assets and the driver pay and where are the trailers, where are the trucks, the ELD integrations, driver workflow, all of these other things that come in. So it's fairly rare that we have a discussion around a complete new build for an asset company, although it can happen. Most of the time, it's us pulling them off of some sort of proprietary build that they had 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago and moving them to a more modern solution. What you do end up having is the augment or build to you buy a solution and then you customize it to meet the final need.
Yeah, I think you hinted at it earlier because it reminds me of this Reddit thread that I was going through about, buying or just analyzing a TMS and which one to invest in. And one of the Reddit comments, it said something to the effect of, for a lot of the legacy systems, that's been built through the blood, sweat, and tears of developers over the last 20 years. And there's a reason why these legacy systems are still around versus some of the newer players that might disrupt some different segments and some different markets, but some of the legacy players are there for a reason.
I just spent the whole week at McLeod visiting with their team, and that's an exact one. I just unboxed that on my show a minute ago. So and so thanks to them, but they're not bad solutions. There's optics and there's history, and trucking companies don't forget, and brokerages don't forget. So it's the same thing with any competing product to the truck that I just picked up. There's a lot that those products do. And to think that a new product is going to come into market, there are very few that are even in the realm of handling 70% of what one of the legacy products does. And when that's our TMS philosophy, just like with any other product, is the best TMS that you have is the one that you own. Prove us wrong, and we'll help you prove it wrong. But many people are just mad because of something that happened in the past, and we can assist with that too. Fixing the relationships is a big deal, but many times this thing can't be done this way. A lot of times it's integration oriented along a legacy TMS and a more modern deployment. But even the modern companies have problems with integrations. They're not really what you think they are in a lot of cases. They're not as advanced. They haven't hit every use case yet. When enterprise level fleets start going on a modern TMS, and that pushes all the way down to mid and small market processes, I think we'll see things clean up. But there's no doubt that the market is different than what it was 10 years ago. It is absolutely different. There are more players in, and there's viable options if you're on a legacy TMS today. But it is expensive, as you alluded to earlier on the brokerage you're at, where you switch to TMS. It's not a fun process, switching your TMS or your ERP, which really we define a TMS as an ERP for the most part for your mid-market fleets. Larger organizations may have an actual ERP. So, and that's a whole nother discussion around, your finance and accounting packages and whatnot. Those are also very complicated and difficult. And many companies are making switches right now on that side too.
Well, speaking of sort of the, making switches and investments and all of that, let's get into the AI portion of this discussion. What is hype and what is actual utility that businesses are being able to use today?
So, I think I walked down that road a little bit before, and I'll tap on it again before I say the next thing. So anything that, I'll state it this way. 15 years ago, there was a lot of optimization that was running. Everything was about the best choice. And I kept calling out that trucking companies and brokerages don't need best choices. That's tribal knowledge. It's up here. Before we can get to talking about the best choice, why don't we reduce workload through automations? And that's most of the areas that we see right now. And some are far more complicated than others. Some are automations that are very simple. This thing happens over here and 10 other things happen over here, and it's pretty linear. Where others are extremely complicated, like going out to websites or interacting with customer portals or scheduling appointments or
Like
whatever the
agents.
case may be. Yeah, the agents or the automations. I put that all together into one box. So it's not all AI to me. It could be RPA, it could be anything, but they all are in the same box. It's not because of the tech behind them, it's because of the solution that they provide to the customer. We're making things go faster with less work, with less labor. And so that all falls kind of in one bucket. And we've evolved to that thinking over the last 2 years. And I can't wait until AI has a better term to it, because right now it's all encompassing, and that's not accurate either. So the hype that we see isn't necessarily hype. It's moreover vetting out use cases. And I say the industry has to go 2 steps forward and 1 step back on this scenario. And we have to be willing to take that step back as fast as possible. So if something's not working, we don't need to grind it in and figure out a way to make it work. We can just let it go and move on to the next thing. And there's so many different solutions that are popping out. A great area that this is being discussed and tried out and deployed is, your agents that are answering phone calls, and there's areas that or that are managing the phone calls. Many cases it works out. In other cases, it's questionable. Companies have had significant pushback on it. We don't know where that's going. In some cases, people are fine with it. In other cases, they are not. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that develops. And that's so from a hype standpoint, when that first came out, which was 2+ years ago that it started hitting market, everyone was jumping on that. And then came the email automations, which I don't believe that is hype. That's a great way of managing your day. I was just on a customer call today that they manage 150 million emails a year.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah, so how do you manage that? So the how do you manage that without some form of automation? They're for the most part doing it today, and we're going to help them try to solve it. But that being said, you have to question everything out there, and a lot of it is how many customers do you have in deployment? Can I talk to one of them that's using it? Are they of significant size? Are they of a similar size? Are they a competitor of yours? And discovering kind of where you're at. But there is a lot of hype that surrounds it. But the question is it hype that's going to work out and be something applicable? Or is it not? Another one that's out is, from a driver standpoint, is mirrorless trucks. So they don't have mirrors on them; they have cameras. So there's part of the industry says these are a bad idea. The other part of the industry is saying they're a good idea. Every driver I've ever talked to actually likes them. But there's things about mirrorless trucks. This is not AI, but the data you can collect from it could be processed by AI. You have cameras around a truck, which create an environment that identifies safety issues. And those cameras have night vision to them. So when you're looking out on a camera, you can see down the back of the truck and way back at nighttime where you can't see that during the day. So someone without lights on could come up beside you and be behind you on the trailer, and you would not see them without a camera, or unlikely wouldn't see them without a camera. So, but that's a great debate on, is that hype or is that not real? I'm in the it's a real application. It's part of the argument is if you get in an accident and you take the mirror out, what are you going to do? But that same that's the biggest argument I've heard. And my point to that is, if you take the mirror out on a truck, that's a physical mirror, not a camera. You're still in the same spot. So it's all about repair and how that thing goes. But so there's lots of areas where hype is questionable. in the cab, out of the cab, with the brokers, with the carriers, maintenance wise, we've seen AI deployed there for years. And that seems great, but as it continues to go on, I think every new use case is going to be, is this real or is this something that we have to vet out?
You mentioned some pushback earlier. What kind of pushback are you hearing or seeing when it comes to
So
using AI?
it's lots of times driver oriented. So, and you have to ask yourself, do you want your drivers talking to agents? And if so, when? If it's something that, they're calling in to schedule a maintenance event, you possibly could. But every time you talk to a driver is a chance to build a relationship and build retention. So, or find out something that you didn't necessarily know. So the question is do you want to lose that, or are you okay with it? That's the main question. And is the driver even going to allow that adoption? They already didn't like track and trace solutions that were offshore. This is not even a human, and whatever the case might be, there is some pushback there. Now, there's also areas that it may work. So I think it's something that has to be vetted out over time. You'd think that we've put enough time into this already, but I think we're actually just now getting it deployed at enough fleets where we're going to get that feedback. Additionally, do you want to negotiate a load with an agent? I don't. I know I wouldn't. So there's a algorithmic rule set around what I can do with that agent or not. So give me the person who can actually make the point or make the decision. What's interesting is on the inverse of that, I could digitally negotiate with that agent and have no idea. We could fire emails back and forth and you'd have no idea, but it's the same rule set, right? You have those sides. Appointment scheduling, let them make the phone calls and sit on hold with Publix for 2 hours. So there's nothing wrong with that. When I first started talking with Happy Robot, right when I think they had just come out of Y Combinator, the first question I asked them is, what happens when you have an AI solution, a bot talking with another bot, and what do you call that? And they said, we've coined that as soft EDI. So, but now that's happening. You have AI solutions potentially talking to AI solutions, and I've heard of a few of them getting in loops, but I really haven't heard of it being an issue. So
I remember when I was listening to a conversation about robotics in a warehouse and how there has to be a level of, whenever a warehouse decides to add robotics, at any point, they have to have sort of a psychological level of onboarding for the humans that are going to be working alongside the robot to kind of reassure them that this robot's not going to take your job. It's here to help you. Do you find that some of that same sort of psychological training is also being deployed on the agent side of things?
I don't think that we're deploying it. I think it's being talked about in some instances, but truly, if you have a front office organization and you are reducing headcount and replacing it by AI, AI does take jobs. Anyone that, we came up with this thing where AI is not coming for your job, right? If you're not going to learn how to use the solutions and work with the solutions and make yourself valuable, you are probably going to have a problem. Or you may have a problem at the very least. So it can replace you in a certain role, right? But it doesn't have to. It most certainly doesn't have to. Or if you learn the solution quite well, now there's people that need to manage those solutions, and that's hard stuff, right? That can be complicated, at least in the initial deployment. So from a logistics service provider standpoint, so trucking company, brokerage, whatever, I don't think there's maybe at the enterprise level, you're seeing some people come in and deal with it from a psychological standpoint. But at other points, at other markets or down market from the enterprise side, mid and small, They're just slapping these things in, and either they recognize the return or they reapply the user to something else. So we challenge all of that and say, this is still a relationship business. It's not going to change. And if you have front office people that no longer are required to do the job that you had it defined, point them towards customer facing interactions that they do need to work with and help grow the business. Same thing with the back office folks that may find that they're not needed anymore. Many of them have been around a long time. Back office turnover is usually much lower than front office turnover at a asset-based carrier for sure. So apply them towards revenue generating potential opportunities. Have them check in with customers, have them do things that you weren't doing before. They're not in sales, right? But if they have the aptitude, deploy them to areas like that and pull back. If you look back when in 2003, 2004, I had plenty of time working in operations to be able to reach out to customers or verify things or whatnot. Now you're managing all these data points, and we've effectively made the business much more complex. So but I do know where you're coming from on the warehouse side, and that's been interesting. But on the same hand, there's still headcount reduction at the warehouse too. Once that's fully deployed, they're not putting them in place to let the warehouse worker work less. So they are experiencing the same thing. So same thing with a port.
It's like a stopgap where they have to. They can't fully replace the human yet, and so they still need to force that collaboration, and maybe the psychological aspect of it is part of that long-term plan for them. On the, I guess maybe like a AI positive or maybe like a tech positive note, if someone is working at a logistics company and they want to start using some of these tools, are there any ones that you would kind of maybe point them to, maybe not vendor specific, but maybe task oriented or goal oriented, of that they can start experimenting with, because we are still so very new to this, and I think for folks outside of technology, it's intimidating for them to jump into these things. So what would maybe be some advice to folks out there who maybe want to dabble a little bit?
Right. So pick one or two use cases that are going to have, and I almost, the last couple of months I've been signing off on my podcast with this kind of statement, which is pick something and fix it. It's much more detailed than that, but effectively find the area of your business that you have a significant pain point in and find the solution that you want to deploy. And if you keep it small, then you're not looking for a large, impactful deployment of it. You just are looking at one thing. So, if you want to automate some of your email order entry, that's a relatively easy one. So, we've been at carriers that have 60-70% of their orders are coming in via email, and they're manually entering that today, and within 60 days you could probably have that completely automated, if not faster. So you really pick where your largest pain point is and what the value add. It's not always about workload reduction. Sometimes it could be visibility, sometimes it could be customer interactions. The ease of use of a solution, I think, is extremely important. And I challenge everyone, if you hand a tablet to a 3-year-old, they're going to figure it out. Whatever game or whatever you give them, come back to them in an hour and they're going to have it figured out. There's absolutely no reason as we go forward that we can't produce products that are in a similar fashion. It's obviously the setup and the configuration and the brain power to produce that solution requires very, very, very smart people. But being able to sit down in front of a solution and say, this is how I'm going to use it, is going to be the empowerment of the future, right? I don't need training anymore. I don't need processes anymore. This is the only way I can use this product. So from a carrier standpoint or a broker standpoint that's looking to dabble in, or even warehousing, shipper, whatever, if I just find an easy use case and go hunting for they all exist. They're order to cash. We went on a mission probably 4 or 5 years ago to automate a trucking company from order to cash, 100%, right? And that was not our development of the solutions. That was finding vendor partners. If you actually scroll through GLCS's vendor partner page or partnership page, a lot of if you start looking at how those, and we partner with many, many more companies than that, but those are our closer ones. If you look at those providers that are in there, you can find pretty much an order to cash automation in some way, shape, or form. We have yet to see a carrier completely automate or a broker completely automate themselves. In theory, it could be done, but it all starts with finding the first thing that you need to do, that you want to tackle. Don't try to hit the home run, just get on first base. So, and work it that way.
Yeah, I used to tell people just keep a extra tab open on ChatGPT or Gemini and start going there instead of Google and just seeing how it answers your questions, how it would push. I use it a lot of times for interview prep, where I'll say,
Sure.
these are the questions I was thinking of asking based on everything, based on their LinkedIn profile. What am I missing? Push back against some of these questions. And I think it just helps to kind of, maybe have a second brain there that's helping you along that thought process.
What you end up with, and I use ChatGPT all the time and for similar processes, right? So every guest that's on, I'm loading up a profile that's around them. And I've built over many years now. And not only that, but I also run a lot of other things through it. So ChatGPT is almost another brain of my own. It's just a lot faster at doing research. And I don't ever just copy paste anything out of there. I'm reading to ensure that it's what I want, but it's enhanced my productivity, by a long shot. And my writing when I do that is typically me, but it's certainly got a component of verification and whatnot through some solution. And I'll actually pick the solution based upon the need. So I pay for premium on pretty much every major platform. I do default the general day-to-day to ChatGPT. And then if I need a good graphic, I'm going to Gemini, or a video, I'll go to Gemini. And, if it has to have correct writing on it, I'm going to take that Gemini image and put it back to ChatGPT and tell it to put the writing on it, because ChatGPT will get that right, but Gemini can't spell. So on a video, on a picture or a video. So, so it's understanding the solutions that you have available to you and how to exploit them. But certainly, if you're not using, ChatGPT or some LLM solution to enhance your day-to-day productivity, you're doing something wrong. We actually pay for every employee at GLCS to have access to an LLM. So and that can be, typically we're going to have Copilot injected with ChatGPT, and then we've connected that to suppliers, so other vendors, and their documentation, and so that allows us to go much faster when we're trying to research something. It may not be right; we need to verify it, but I actually had a scenario where I did that, and I solved the problem for a customer that I had no business solving. I ended up pushing it back to our support team and had them verify. But I was sitting there talking to a CIO, and I said, "Have you guys tried this?" And it ended up being a problem that they've been fighting with for years. So, so it was, but that's because we have these huge libraries that we've built out and made available to us, and have refined and trained the products since we've been able to.
Are you utilizing any agents, and what kind of, I guess I'm just now starting to dabble in agents. I've used Zapier for forever. And so I've struggled with, what's the difference between a Zap and creating an agent? And I don't exactly know quite yet if there is a difference there yet.
So we use Zapier as well. We also have a large integrations team that so we are using agents on the development side. By all means, that's probably sped up development quite a bit. But I don't know of any one that has a developer on staff that's not using some form of Claude or whatever. So the outside of that, from a customer facing standpoint, we do not use agents. Everything is interacted at a human level. And I don't see us changing that based on our customer base. It doesn't, we're too complicated at this moment. That, once again, we can't predict what's going to happen in 5 years. We may not. But we have that extremely trained product that we've opened up to everybody that allows answers to be found, or at least directions to be found. So if they have a use case that they need to figure out, they're going to go there first, and then they're going to potentially expand within our organization to ask questions to humans. But as far as, specific agents on our end, outside of development, not really, and outside of some integrations, not yet. So
no podcast agents, because we haven't gotten to that, part of the conversation yet. And I know I want to be respectful of your time.
That's all right.
I want to talk about okay, good. Okay. Yeah. Then we got some time then. But on the podcast side of things, what inspired you to get started? Because I was listening to you on another show earlier today, and I think you said that you had recorded over the summer like 90 pieces of content or something to that effect. It was like a year ago, so I don't know if
Sure. That's probably some. I went through and started trying to put out. So what started me doing it was I introduced I introduced someone at the Minnesota Trucking Association annual conference many years ago. I used to do a lot of public speaking, and then for 5-6 years I didn't do any public speaking, and so I eventually ended up doing this introduction. And I frankly bombed it. And I said, after that, lots of people have been challenging me to come forward and start talking about the industry. There's virtually no topic that I can't sit down and talk about in some way, shape, or form. And, whether I'm not an authority in it or whether I'm close to an authority in it, order to cash at a trucking company or a brokerage, I can usually talk about anything there and be fine. So that being said, I decided to start the podcast to clean up my speech. It had nothing to do with anything else. It was just, actually, when you and I met, that next day was my first episode.
What? Because we met at
F3 years ago. And then my first episode was, I actually did it in Chattanooga at a podcast studio. And so that was the driving factor of why I started the podcast. I did not care about viewers. I did not care. I they're either coming or they're not. I just needed to clean up the way I speak. And that's worked out very well. And on top of that, so then you go to the moonshot of it of, what would I like to achieve? After a little while, it was, I'd like to get some speaking engagements. I'd like to, learn more. I've met more people through the podcast that I normally wouldn't meet than any other medium, I'd say. And so it served this tool going forward that I continue to do it 2 years in. I think there's several hundred pieces of content, not including that those videos I was talking about where it was, I went through our implementation process, and I don't even think I finished it. I took it through maybe halfway, and then I realized this was a bad way of doing it. I should have done it a different way. I'll get back to it. And I've never gotten back to it. So at some point we will get back to sharing that out, but I was doing, screen shares of here's every point that we have through vendor selection all the way through go live, and then actually support following go live. So that's all on YouTube and is available in some fashion. I tried to do it in like 2 to 3 minute clips, and then not knowing how to do things back then, I actually recorded them and edited them in 2 to 3 minute clips instead of recording the whole shebang and slicing it up. And that was my error. That was massive amounts of work. So, but that's really why I started and where it's gone from there. Since then, it's just been a great tool. In general, we're looking at launching a few other podcasts, potentially 2 more. we don't take sponsors on driving forward. It's meant to do what I want to do with it, and I don't. If I don't want to do it, then I don't have to do it. But I don't think I've ever, outside of vacation and a conference here and there, I don't think we've ever missed a week. So
wow. Do you have a favorite episode?
so there's 2 episodes that come to mind, maybe 3. My first one that I ever had, which I can't even watch anymore because I'm horrible, was Chris Thomas. And Chris
nice.
Thomas is, Chris? Okay. So yeah. And Chris and I have become friends through it. He's going to be at Manifesting. He's been there the last 3 years, including this year. So I got to know Chris at the same place that I met you. So, but Autumn Transport, I know people that work there, and I saw Autumn Transport coming to F3. So I reached out to him. I said, "Who's this?" It's an owner operator. So I made it my point to find Chris at F3. So he was actually the first episode, technically the second episode, because the first episode was me talking about who I am. Following that, I enjoy any episode that has a senior leader in a trucking or brokerage operation that we go into market discussion. I always like talking about that. While I'm a tech guy, I ran trucking companies for years, and I love the industry, and I love the that type of business. So I study it still today. I need to understand what our customers are dealing with. So that's a good portion of my time, is staying on top of markets, staying on top of, processes to run your company. And I used to be, well, GLCS still has a small component of management consulting. So those generally are my favorite, but the 2 most favorite, first one is when I had Tom McLeod on. I think he's only done 2 podcasts, and ours is the second one. The other one was with Cassandra. And then I had Nick Darman on at Manifest last year, and Nick Darman is the CEO of Elvis. And Nick just really surprised me, and I've got to spend some time with him since then, a few times at dinners and whatnot. He is a very energetic person and fun to understand, and just, he surprised me. It was not the person I thought it was going to be when I met him at Manifest last year. So,
and I imagine that if you're like me, that you use the podcast to learn from smart people. I mean, this is just, a recorded conversation that's a little bit more structured of me picking your brain,
right? Right.
Logistics tech implementation goes wrong, because I'm just curious about the topic. And so I would imagine that the podcast serves as a similar function for you, where you just get to learn from people you like, or maybe don't even know you like yet.
Right. And in many cases, I'm talking with people on a network, but in some cases I know them really well. In some cases I don't. I would like to use it for more of those. On the same hand, I'm running GLCS has become significantly larger and more complex. So it's, how do I fit in the time for the podcast every week? And so it's a challenge to do that sometimes. But and in doing that, I've learned that I like working with groups of people on it. And so we started to change the format that way. And that's one of the reasons why, no sponsors, no anything like that. We're just doing what we want to do because we want to do it. And viewership has gone up, gone down, gone up. It's all over the place. It's certainly stronger in the winter than the summer, but we also keep it a live show. So, that's one, that's a love-hate thing too. So every Thursday at 1:00 Central Time, I have to be somewhere to do the podcast, whether that's in, whatever state, whatever. But that means if I'm traveling, I travel a lot, I got to carry a mic with me. I got to carry a camera with me. I like doing in-person podcasts too. So we do a lot of those. I know you guys do that too. So, it's been a good thing. I learn from everyone that I sit down in front of, or with, whether I think I'm going to or not. And sometimes you are absolutely surprised by what you find out. So,
yes. Are there any topics that you haven't covered yet that you want to cover?
Typically, if I want to cover a topic, it's gonna get covered. So,
Good answer.
What I actually try to stay away from technology as episodes,
Hmm.
and try to talk more market and a few other things. And we'll bring tech. So we found that we'll bring tech forward along with customers. So it's not just a discussion about what your solution does. It's a discussion about what your solution does and your customer base with them,
Hmm.
discussing how you've been impactful to their organization, which then typically will get into some sort of industry discussion about the solve. And I enjoy that more. I talk technology all day long from morning till night. And so doing a podcast on technology is not something I mean, I will include it, but I'm not super excited most of the time to do it. So
Yeah. And I think you have to be excited about the topic. Otherwise the audience feels it and they'll tune
absolutely.
out.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why, if I'm talking to the providers, the logistic service providers, um, along with their solution provider, it's a different conversation. It's much more engaging for me. And it's not that I don't want to talk to the technology platform. It's you can just tell that there's very few times do we have the technology platform be an energetic episode on my side, which is not knocking any of you guys because I love you all, but
No, I
it's
see
just
that on
me.
my own data where the executives from the tech solution will come on the show and it does decent. But if they have their customer come on and talk about everything that they were going through, what did they Google search before they
Right.
even knew that they had a problem? Or when they did discover a problem, what were the vendors that they were searching? Those kinds of discussions just resonate with my audience so much more than a vendor coming on. And I try to balance it, especially with the vendor conversations, where I want to kind of dig a little bit deeper and understand their onboarding and pricing and all of that. But the audience just, I think, resonates more with the customer story. And then I've
Absolutely.
seen it where it's almost like the reverse, where they listen to the customer story and then they're like, okay, I think I'll give the executive interview a shot now.
Yeah, unless that executive is a rock star, like the Tom McLeod thing. That's our most watched episode by a long shot. And um so that and we have an extremely niche audience. So I know everybody says you see us everywhere, but you are typically involved in trucking or brokerage, and you're typically an executive or close there to, or you're interested in becoming an influencer, or you're just active on LinkedIn. And we do have a following on X and on Facebook as well, but we've never optimized any other platform. Like YouTube has all of our content; it's great and organized there, but I have no views there. But if you go, your target audience is executives in transportation logistics, you have a pretty small audience. I mean, your total addressable market there is not a lot. So you
Maybe a
have
couple thousand.
couple thousand. Well, if I actually kind of know the number, so there's 20,000 customers in our market, roughly. So if you figure, 1 to 3 there, you're somewhere around 30 to 35,000 potential, and we'll get as many as 1,000 watching a week. So
Well, I mean, this was a really insightful conversation to me, especially because I work more on the website management, so the front end marketing. What customers and potential employees see before they engage with a logistics company. But I've always been fascinated by I guess sort of the real IT that goes on in logistics, and that's exactly what you and your company are providing over at
yep.
GLCS. And I'm curious, last couple questions here. Is there anything that you feel is important to mention that we haven't already talked about?
Generally speaking, we didn't really touch on
Oh my gosh,
cybersecurity.
yes.
So lots of trucking companies, brokerages, whatnot. They're very aware of freight fraud. we're very aware of freight fraud. We're right in the middle of that battle because a lot of the activities that happen in freight fraud are actually cyber crimes. Cyber crimes are a $12.4 trillion issue globally. It is the third largest GDP in theory if you put it up. It's the US, China, and or is it China, US now? Whatever. China and the US are the top two, and this actually sits as the third. So when we talk freight fraud, that's a number that continues to go up in dollar amount. And yes, there are hijackings that happen, and that's almost not preventable unless you're going to change your operating policies. So, but a lot of these scenarios in cyber are people gaining access to your information and exploiting it in some way, shape, or form. And so, if you don't, as an organization, have fundamentals in place or a partner that is putting those fundamentals in place, and that partner actually knows what they're doing. There's a lot of people who tout that they're cyber, but they don't really understand. So, we're in that unique spot of we understand the freight fraud. We actually do freight fraud assessments. And then, but those are becoming less because I think everybody's kind of got their grasp on it themselves. Insurance companies have taken it over. But on the cybersecurity side, it's extremely important. And we've seen some wild and crazy things happen over the last 10 years, but really in the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen them exploited even further. So definitely ensure, we're talking about all these ways to optimize companies, but one stolen load
can cripple
could be extremely crippling. Could be the difference of you're in business or you're not. You obviously have insurance, but one stolen load or typically, if you're a brokerage and you get hit once, you're probably being attempted to get hit, multiple more times all at the same time. We've had scenarios where someone's listening in on email, and the moment that you transfer your payment information to them, to a new customer, they grab it and they go clean out your account or attempt to. So do you have the right processes with your bank to ensure that can't happen? Those type of things. So those are all areas. So as your managed IT provider, they need to be all encompassing, not only looking at your typical structure of your Microsoft products and your users and setting up new users and whatnot, but they also need to be very aware of the software that matters to you, your TMS, your accounting package, how that all interacts, and be able to look for anomalies within it when you're being attacked. And you are being attacked every day. I had 1.2 million hits against our router last week. So, that if you're not measuring that and you can't go to IT and ask that question, you're doing something wrong. So,
and so when you talk about, I think it was an episode that I was listening to you on earlier when it was, I think you said a stat that was like 85% of cybersecurity crime happens because at the user level.
Correct. Just mistraining. You clicked on the wrong thing. So we offer a service that we do. So that's a great spot. It's not AI, but it's an automation. We offer training on a monthly basis. We measure that training, and we'll perform kind of mock trials for users and hit them with generated phishing attempts and see if we can get them to click on things or provide a stat or whatever the case might be internally. And then we get that back to the customer, and then we typically want them to work with the employee about things, so if they've had a bad behavior that they shouldn't do, then they're going to have to handle that. But ultimately, 85% of all cyber events, and that number floats between 85 and 93, depending upon what data set you're looking at, come from user error. Another user error is someone calling you. I'll call you, Blythe, and say, "Hey, it's Nate," but it's not me. It's some dude in Uzbekistan or whatever, and he just sounds like me because my voice is all over the internet and it wasn't hard to replicate. So we have policies. We're a remote company. We have an office, but it's small considering our size, and if I want something cash moved or whatever the case might be, it's a multiple authentication on our side. We're not going to just move cash to somebody, and especially to something weird or outside of the organization without having a process completed. We've had customers, a good story there. We have customers that we're going to wire information to areas or to vendors. I think they were buying trucks, and the organization had locked that down. You could no longer wire cash. You had to actually send a check. Well, when you go through the process of that, does that actually make sense? Because someone can intercept the check too. So why not pick up the phone, call the location? There's processes that fix all of these things. And lots of times the human interaction is what's required to verify. But you pick up the phone, you call the number of the person that you've called for the last 10 years because you've had that relationship with them. You give it to them or give it to them verbally instead of digitally when you're going to wire somebody $500,000. So,
or buy a bunch
of
gift
there
cards.
Are ways. What's that?
Or buy a bunch of gift cards. I had a friend that fell for that one.
Right. Well, the reality of it is everything can be exploited. So trust but verify is extremely important. And yeah, cyber is massive, and it's not just attacking, for millions of dollars right now. It could be it could be you personally, and they want $500, and that's a dollar figure you're probably going to pay, because by the time you go to law enforcement and figure out, they're not going to pay attention to you anyway for $500 on the law enforcement side. If you want whatever data back, you're going to take that risk for $500, and they're going to get it. Then what do? Do you clean your stuff up, or do you go, okay, I'm okay now until the next time you get hit? So it is on a personal level. It's on a business level. The dollar figures can be, small to very large.
Are there any, maybe a couple of the most common ways that you see that these attackers are kind of getting in, or these scammers?
Yeah, it's certainly phishing attempts. Email is going to be the largest. So yeah, and I imagine if you looked at your email, you may be filtering it out. There are solutions that will. Okay, so that's an agent we are using, is that email filter on the cyber side. So we are looking for phishing. Massive amounts of emails will come in, and you'll scrape it out. Lots of people might have an old product called a Barracuda or something like that that's doing that for you. Those work fine too, but phishing is absolutely, one of the I think it is the largest, because all you got to do is click on the wrong thing and they get access. That can happen on your phone too, so be aware of that. Phones are not safe. So
I had another girlfriend that was working at an office, and she they were doing a test, to the phishing email test, and they sent her a company-wide email, and it said, oh, you've been rewarded, with we're bringing catering lunch into the office, and here, click here to pick out what you want to eat. And she fell for it. And instead of getting the lunch, she had to sit through training on cybersecurity basics.
Yeah. Well, a great one is, how many times do you see a post come over on email that says it's from LinkedIn? Those are
one a couple little letters off, or one letter off, or
it could look exactly the way you expected, or from whatever, from Delta if you're a traveler, or whatever the case might be. So I generally do not click on any link, like a LinkedIn link or a social media link, because that's a big target. I do not click on my email. I'll go to the app and go find what I'm looking for. So it might be a reminder, but yeah, I certainly don't click on those links on my email. You never know.
All of the marketers, you have to be aware of this, that, I guess that the cybersecurity training is telling people not to click on any social links or email links. So what's the marketer to do?
Right. So as a general rule, I hate email marketing. I'm sorry to say that, being a marketer, but I also work with a lot of marketing companies, but I generally don't. If we are sending out an email that's going to have a lot of people attached to it, it's going to be a very unique email, and it's going to make a lot of sense. So, but we do not generally email market much. So, which is a limiter. But I'll also tell you this: I work with a lot of CEOs. They're paying people to not read your emails, to move them out of their inbox. I actually do the same thing. I have someone that monitors my email and moves everything out that I don't want to see, which is any solicit. If you solicit me in any way, shape, or form, most especially on LinkedIn or email or whatever, I'm probably not responding to you unless you have something amazing to say. And that's because it's nothing against you. I'm a salesperson at heart, but I get so many. I get so many. I probably get 100 plus messages a day on LinkedIn, and
Wow.
I
Oh
can't
my
even
gosh.
maintain them. It's off the charts. It's off the charts. So I look for people I know
Hmm.
on the LinkedIn Messenger, and if you're not someone I've ever discussed with before, you better have the first line be something interesting, or I'm not going to respond to it. And otherwise, I just look for people I know. So some people will be like, "Hey, it's been 4 days since you got back to me on this LinkedIn message. If you want to get a hold of me, you need to text me or email me and have it be a real thing." So marketing to me, on that side, if you're wanting to hit a CEO, in my opinion, you need to put social media messages out in the tools that they're using, because
Yeah.
they will eventually come across them.
And then they'll reach out to you, and then you don't have to worry about your emails and your links getting ignored.
Yeah, or the in-person discussion. That's one of the reasons you go to conferences. But that's the C-level approach, right? I mean, not everybody's that way, but the C-levels that we work with are primarily trying not to engage in any way, shape, or form, and they're looking to slim down all those interactions. So, but if you're a known person and they know who you are, you're probably going to have a discussion with them. So you can engage them in any medium then. So
That makes sense. I'll take the personal tips, and I'll try to adjust my messaging.
what's tried and true is blasting out a bazillion emails and hoping that somebody responds back to it. And people do that every which way, and it still functions. So it really depends upon who you're wanting to respond to. But that's just my 2 cents on it. I'm probably wrong in some fashion, but I know what I don't like, and I'm not going to have the company do something I don't like. So
Yeah, that's very true. And I would imagine that more and more companies are going to take on that mindset where if you want to reach someone, try not
yeah,
to try to be where they're at, but also in a way that doesn't take them off platform in a suspicious way, because their IT team is going to yell at them.
it's pretty risky. So and you never know these days. So you just kind of the Manifest app is a great app because you have that messaging thing, and then you can take them off of that messaging piece. But you reach out far before you get there, and you get all your meetings started up. And then, although the only problem with Manifest now is it's gotten so huge that app has like 7,000 people on it or something. So it's like, how do you navigate your way through that? You can search things, you can do it outside, search trucking, search logistics, search CEO, and see who I want to talk to that way. And then, but it still takes a bit. So
Yeah, on my side of things, on the media side of things, it's so many PR emails.
yeah,
It's a lot, and I'm finding it difficult to manage. Even before we were started recording for this conversation, I'm looking up how to label emails within my workspace within Gmail, and trying to figure out different labeling mechanisms so I can just contact the people I genuinely want to contact with, and then some of the pitches that don't make a whole heck of a lot of sense that go into another folder. It's a lot, but
yeah,
all of this is a lot. And
yeah.
I deeply appreciate, because we're running up, I think, close to 2 hours. This might be my
Right.
longest podcast here in a couple years now.
Wow.
Which
What do
you
you know?
couldn't even tell because, this has been such an interesting topic, I think, to explore in a variety of different ways. And thank you so much for bringing up the cybersecurity angle. Obviously I did not have that in my notes and I should have. So that was a great additional bonus there. So Nate, you're doing so many things. You're going to be at Manifest. This episode is going to publish before Manifest. So if folks are interested in you and GLCS, checking out your podcast, even checking out, another line of business, which we haven't got into,
Right.
your freight movement events. I'll put all of those links in the show notes to make it easy for folks.
Perfect.
But where can folks engage with you the most that maybe not LinkedIn and maybe don't include a link if they're going to reach out?
Right. So don't if you're new to me, don't hit me up on LinkedIn. You can. I mean, maybe I'll respond, but if you do, put in Blythe as the top. So if you're on this and you want to hit me on LinkedIn, put Blythe at the top. But that being said, it's njohnson@glcs.net. If you send me a human email, I'm probably going to catch it. And I am on LinkedIn. A comment will typically catch me, and on LinkedIn will typically catch me. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to respond, but social media is pretty wild. But absolutely email every Thursday, driving forward at 1:00 Central Time, and every freight movement event out there for the most part. I try to make them all, and then I'm at every major industry event for the most part, at least through May. So if you
want to get in contact, you better do it in person at one of these events.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're a customer, I'll work with any medium. So,
all right, Nate, this was awesome. Thank you so much, and can't wait to catch up with you again here in
absolutely. We'll see you in a few weeks. If you get in Sunday, we're throwing a Super Bowl thing up in our suite, so let me know. But otherwise, looking forward to seeing you there, and safe travels.
Yeah, likewise. You as well.